When the storm washes the sky clean, Ryker Flint, a lone mechanic drifting through the desert, slams on the brakes at the sight of a collapsed figure in the road. Serafina Finn Vale, daughter of a ruthless empire, clutches a blood-soaked envelope of cash. From this moment, the chase between freedom and power ignites, uncovering cold-blooded secrets beneath the glittering facade. The highland sky hung silent, as if stripped bare, with only the wind howling through patches of dry grass, fierce and unyielding, like the screams of a desolate desert. The asphalt road, cracked and shattered, stretched like scars on the earth's face, fading into the hazy horizon. Ryker Flint crouched beside his battered old truck, wiping oil stains from his faded jeans. 3 unpaid jobs, a nearly empty gas tank, and the engine's fake groans with every failed start had turned the sunset afternoon into his own private hell. A man with nothing left to lose. As his fingers brushed the ignition, the wind slapped his face, threatening to sweep him away into the vast emptiness. Then came the gritty crunch of sandals behind him, cold and sharp, like a command he couldn't ignore. He turned, his gaze cutting through the dust, landing on a gaunt figure sprinting toward him. The girl, her thin jacket tattered, knees poking through ripped jeans, sneakers caked in dirt, stumbled on the gravel, but didn't stop. Her black hair, matted and wild, danced in the fierce wind, revealing pale skin streaked with soot and sweat. "Please, let me hitch a ride. Anywhere, please." Her voice was hoarse, trembling in the roaring air. Ryker Flint froze, hand half on the door handle, caught between go and stay. The sight before him, a fragile shadow, like a leaf falling in a barren march, wasn't something he'd expected on this miserable day. He took a deep breath. The fuel gauge's needle hovered at the final mark, warning that the next trip might be the truck's last. But the girl's eyes, a chaotic mix of panic and a desperate will to live, struck something deep inside him. A faint flicker of belief in kindness he thought he'd lost. "You? In trouble?" His voice was rough, like sand caught in his throat. She flinched, glancing around, then shook her head slightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, not exactly. I need to escape that place." He squinted, scanning the road stretching back to a cluster of abandoned houses in the distance, where the wind had just torn through. He yanked the door open, stepping on the rusted pedal, steadying himself as he slid into the driver's seat. The passenger door flew open. Serafina Finn, in her full name, threw herself into the seat, her thin wool dress fluttering in the cold draft, as if the wind might carry her away. The door slammed shut with a harsh clang, like closing a gate to the old world and opening a new journey. The engine roared to life, mingling with the clatter of metal in the brewing storm. Ryker hit the gas, and the truck lurched forward on the uneven road, trailing a cloud of dust. He glanced over, seeing Finn curled up in her thin jacket, eyes glued to the windshield, fingers lightly clawing at her shirt. Her lips were pressed tight, holding back the shivers that gripped her. Neither spoke. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Only the wind battering the glass, the tires screeching on cracked asphalt, and the heavy breaths of 2 strangers forced to share the road filled the space. In that moment, Ryker Flint realized he was being pulled into a story he hadn't chosen, but one that had chosen him. Soon, the sunset sank behind them, painting the sky red, blending with the road's dust. Ryker tapped the steering wheel slowly and asked, "So, you really can't say why you're running?" His voice was still gruff, but now laced with curiosity. She turned to him, her voice soft. I can't be a puppet in someone else's game." The bitter confession tightened his chest. The empty road stretched ahead, no end in sight. He gave a light honk, like an unspoken promise to find a way out together. Finn nodded, her eyes sparking with a faint glimmer of hope, just enough to warm the icy air. As the truck veered into a dark curve, the wind still screamed, weaving a primal nightmare. But inside the cramped cab, for the first time in countless weary days, they found a wordless understanding. They were lost in a desolate world, but no longer alone. And in the howling wind, on that endless road, the journey of Serafina Finn Vale and Ryker Flint began. The truck rolled away from the edge of town, the wind whistling through the narrow door crack, dragging a heavy silence into the cab. Ryker Flint pursed his lips, eyes locked on the cracked asphalt ahead. Beside him, Serafina Finn Vale sat rigid, shoulders hunched, hands gripping the edge of her jacket. They traveled in an eerie stillness, as if each breath was stolen by the wind. Only the low growl of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel under the tires echoed in the worn interior. The sunset painted the sky red outside, but inside, the cab was dark as ink. Ryker gripped the steering wheel with both hands, his movement steady, though his gaze flicked toward Finn. Fragile, like a flower swaying in a sandstorm. He didn't ask more, but the faint, forced smile tugging at his lips told her enough. This silence was heavier than any question. The journey continued, but the truck's fuel gauge screamed depletion. The needle teetered, like the final piece of a crumbling puzzle. Ryker muttered, "Gotta stop soon." His voice was dry, taut, like the wind tearing through a barren valley. Finn nodded faintly, her eyes fixed on the window, where dust and darkness merged into an inescapable void. As the road curved ahead, Ryker leaned closer, keeping his voice low. "You got nothing else to say?" The question was blunt, sharp, but swallowed by the engine's rumble. Finn pressed her lips together, trembling as she pulled a crumpled map from her pocket and spread it on her lap. Her hands shook so much the paper's folds quivered, revealing the corner of an envelope peeking out. Curiosity gnawed at him. Ryker sighed, pulling onto the dirt shoulder. He cut the engine, leaving a silence taut as a guitar string. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the drip of oil hitting the floor and their ragged breaths. Ryker leaned over, the truck's dim headlights casting a sickly yellow glow on Finn's face, revealing delicate but exhausted features. He popped open the glove compartment. Inside was a black cloth bag, bulging with secrets. Ryker lifted it out, exhaling slowly. When he pulled an envelope from the bag, the thick, heavy paper made his fingers pause. The envelope wasn't sealed, a small tear revealing crisp stacks of cash, hundreds of dollar bills. The cab's light flickered, catching the green-white sheen of the money. "What? What is this?" Ryker whispered, his voice a mix of shock and unease. Finn stared at him, eyes wide, hesitating. That's... I thought I had needed to pay for the ride." She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. But her eyes couldn't hide it. The amount in the envelope was more than he'd ever seen. He closed it, running his fingers along the edge, a chill creeping up his spine. The silence turned brutal. Both held their breath, listening to their own heartbeats. An invisible weight settled over the tiny space. Ryker glared at Finn, his voice low and sharp. "You're not just some runaway. This is bigger than you." Finn bit her lip, a flicker of sorrow in her eyes. I just want to be free, okay? I thought I needed." Her words hung between suspicion and sympathy. Ryker gripped the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. He slid back into the driver's seat, carefully shutting the glove compartment, locking it as if sealing away something toxic. He restarted the engine, its roar shattering the silence once more. As the wheels rolled forward, Ryker didn't look over, but his eyes darted to the passenger seat. Under the glow of passing streetlights, Finn's silhouette was quiet, hurled into herself as if trying to vanish into her jacket. The tension hadn't faded, now layered with fresh doubt. You're carrying that much cash. What else are you hiding? Finn clutched the edge of her jacket, her voice nearly choked. I don't know how to explain. The tremor in her tone told Ryker the truth was still buried deep behind that envelope. The road ahead stretched endlessly, but this time the silence between them carried a heavy stone of doubt, pressing down on their trembling hearts. The desert sky faded under a crescent moon, but the questions made the cramped cab feel scalding. Ryker Flint gripped the wheel, his gaze restless. He couldn't turn back, but a storm bigger than any envelope was brewing inside him. The fragile trust was unraveling, and they kept rolling through the chaotic night, caught between doubt and hope. The drizzle pattered against the deserted cabin's window, signaling a restless night. In the dim, yellowish light, Ryker Flint leaned against the rotting wooden wall, his eyes fixed on his rough, calloused hands crumpling a paper cup of cold coffee. Each breath rose faintly in the musty air, as if trying to lift the veil of secrets hanging between two strangers. Across the room, Serafina Finn Vale stared silently at the pile of broken kindling, her eyes hazy, reflecting a soul tormented by unanswered questions. The steady drip of rain on the cabin's roof echoed like the heavy beat of Ryker's heart. He tore his gaze from his hands, took a slow, deep breath and let it out. "All right, I need you to be straight with me. What are you running from?" His voice sharpened, not harsh but cutting enough to shatter the wall of silence. The rain outside seemed to pause, as if nature itself were listening. Finn curled inward, inhaling softly before exhaling, her lips trembling. She raised a shaky hand to brush back her drenched hair. I'm Alistair Vale's daughter." The words slipped from her thin lips, sending a shiver through the fragile air. That name, Alistair Vale, rang like a war drum, summoning the weight of an unseen, colossal force onto her shoulders. Vale Corp, Ryker muttered, piecing together the name tied to immense power. He leaned forward, his hand brushing the cracked wooden floor, mirroring the wear of his own life. You're the heiress of that empire?" His tone was calm, as if confirming something he'd long suspected. Finn's eyes flashed with a mix of shock and fear. "Yes," she admitted quietly, her voice a faint echo in the cold space. "I'm Serafina Finn Vale. I chose to run from a gilded cage, to leave behind a forced marriage and soulless bank accounts." Each word fell like a mournful melody, every pause carrying the weight of a luxurious life she despised. Ryker didn't rush to respond. He stood, walked to the window, and pressed his hand against the icy glass. He stared into the pitch-black night, where rain fell in steady sheets. The streetlight's glow reflected off the water street, peeling wood. The wind howled through the cracks, mocking them. He turned back, eyeing Finn from head to toe. "So, the cash, the documents, what's it all for?" She hugged herself, her shoulders trembling. She hesitated, her eyes welling up. "I'm trying to stand on my own. I thought if I had enough evidence I could hand it to the right people, expose the corruption, stop my family from crushing others." Her words carried a grand ambition, but they were steeped in the fear of someone fleeing their own conscience. Ryker let out a humorless chuckle. "You mean you want to take down your own family?" His tone held a hint of sarcasm, but not rejection. His eyes lingered, probing, like a mechanic inspecting a complex blueprint. She nodded slowly, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Yes, I believe justice should lie ahead, not in the dungeon of power." The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of rotting wood, ink from crumpled documents, rain, and faint traces of oil. Ryker took a step, crouching before Finn, gently lifting her chin. "Are you sure this isn't just running away anymore? This is suicide?" His eyes demanded a conviction stronger than a vague affirmation. "I'm sure," she replied, her voice hoarse but resolute. I've lived in a golden cage too long. I can't wait to become my father's puppet. I want freedom." A flash of lightning lit the window, making her cheekbones glisten. That freedom, however fragile, shone brighter than any plea. Ryker sighed, tilting his head to stare at the cracked cabin ceiling. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of gentleness. "All right, Finn. I'll help you, but I can't promise you'll survive." His words carried both caution and steadfast commitment. Finn gave a sad smile, leaning slightly into his hand. In that fleeting touch, two broken souls found each other at the edge of right and wrong. As the rain outside erupted into thunder and lightning, they sat there, an unlikely pair, facing a conspiracy that was no longer hers alone to bear, but one Ryker had been pulled into. They were on a thorny path to freedom. Amid the thunder and damp haze, a vow was spoken. They would confront Vale Corp's might, to prove that freedom and justice could prevail, even at the cost of their lives. The rain poured from the sky like buckets, hurling heavy drops onto the cracked road as Ryker Flint guided the groaning truck into a desolate gas station amid the night's storm. The flickering neon light cast shimmering patches across the dust-caked truck, creating ghostly glimmers in the sea of rain. The wind howled, roaring past the fuel pumps like the furious cries of an enraged nature. Ryker killed the engine, sitting still in the cab, listening to the static hum of a faulty radio and feeling his heart constrict under the eerie pressure of the air. The sky was pitch black, clouds twisting into ominous waves, promising a ferocious tempest on the horizon. He opened the door and stepped into the downpour. Water flooding his ankles, washing away oil stains on the weathered concrete. Each of his steps echoed like a warning drum in the night, the sound creeping into the ears of Serafina Finn Vale, curled up by the window. She didn't move, her eyes glued to the rain splattering across the glass, blurring Ryker's figure before her. Her long hair, soaked and clinging to her cheeks, let droplets slide down her collar, glinting silver. She hugged her knees, trying to suppress the cold and the fear lurking within. The gas station stood alone, with only one working pump, its convenience store's sign glowing faintly, a forgotten relic of time. Ryker bent to open the fuel cap, the rain pounding the hood, mingling with the clink of metal as he pulled the nozzle free. His figure was rugged, an old raincoat clinging to his broad shoulders, his sturdy frame like a pillar against the storm. He inserted the nozzle and pulled the trigger, fuel rushing into the tank, its vapor mixing the scents of rain and canola oil. In that moment, Ryker's mind flashed to the crumpled map in the glove compartment, but instead of reaching for it, he peered through the rain, imagining the faint outlines of black SUVs lurking at the road's edge. His heart skipped, but he didn't flinch. When the tank was full, he withdrew the nozzle, hung it back, and turned, trudging through muddy puddles. The truck door creaked open, the metal frame trembling with anticipation. Instead of calling Finn to follow, Ryker ducked under the dash, quietly pulling the thick envelope from the glove compartment, holding it between his hands. The dim station light barely illuminated the paper, but he recognized the Vale Corp seal. In that instant, the rain seemed to soften, leaving only the growing thud of his heartbeat. Finn watched him through the rear-view mirror, her eyes locked on his hands, trembling at the sight of the envelope. The world around them seemed to freeze, the storm's roar fading into an uncanny hush. Ryker Flint stood tall, his gaze dark, studying the envelope as if it held the universe's secrets. He flipped it over, his fingertips brushing the edge, exhaling softly. "This thing you're carrying, it's bigger than you realize." His voice was hoarse, echoing like a whisper in an abandoned mine. Serafina Finn Vale let out a shaky breath, stepping out to open the opposite door. She inhaled deeply, rain stinging her face like sea salt, her eyes flashing with resolve. "I need it," she said softly, her voice breaking. "It's the only key to keeping me alive, and the proof to bring down my father's schemes." Alistair Vale. The name slipped from her lips with weight, Alistair Vale, head of Vale Corp, the man who orchestrated her arranged marriage and backed the criminal plans she'd just fled. Ryker stood pensive, the wind whipping his raincoat, his figure towering like a rock in a flood. He tucked the envelope back into the glove compartment, snapped it shut, set the keys down, and turned to her. "If you think coming here makes you safe, you're dead wrong." His tone was stern, his hand resting on Finn's shoulder, as if to lend her some of his courage. "We need a real hideout. Got anywhere else in mind?" Finn shook her head, tears mingling with the rain. "I don't know, I just know I can't go back." She bowed her head, lips pressed tight, trembling to hold back her spiraling fear. In the frigid gas station, two souls stood amid the tempest, hearing each raindrop strike the truck's hood, the engine's idle hum fading as if their lives were only beginning, as the refueled truck roared to life again. Ryker draped an arm over her shoulder, his voice a mix of warmth and steel. "Get in. We're finding a place to hide." The door slammed shut, the moment swallowed by the storm, but amid the raging rain a faint glimmer of light seemed to spark, the start of a journey to hide, to plan, and to fight. The storm outside the gas station wasn't just wild nature. It mirrored the trials awaiting them. But Ryker and Finn knew that only by holding fast to each other could they hope to pierce the dark night and uncover a future. The night deepened, with only the wind swirling outside the derelict cabin. Inside, the fire in the rusted iron stove flickered, casting a faint warmth that pushed back the damp, musty air. Ryker Flint crouched before the stove, holding a glowing match, his eyes fixed on the rotting logs. The flames danced faintly across the dark wood, flaring with bursts of green smoke, and in that hazy moment, he tasted the bittersweet essence of survival. The warped wooden door creaked as a gust slipped through, bending his shadow on the wall into a bronze statue forged in desolation. In the middle of the cabin, Serafina Finn Vale curled up on a rickety chair, clutching a tattered blanket Ryker had brought from his auto shop. Her hands rested on her elbows, her gaze locked on the fire, as if it held answers to her secrets. The firelight illuminated her face, highlighting delicate features mixed with a defiant pride, a heiress of power now reduced to a fragile silhouette in the deep wilderness. The occasional crackle of burning wood snapped like brittle bones, and the night wind outside echoed distant reverberations. Ryker Flint held a paper cup of steaming coffee, its heat rising in wisps. He offered it to her, his voice soft. "Drink. Get some of this warmth in you." The coffee was bitter, but to Finn it was the first taste of freedom. She gave a faint smile, her eyes tinged with sorrow, and took a small sip. After Finn steadied her trembling breaths, she pulled the thick envelope from her jacket pocket and placed it on the rotting wooden table. The blanket quivered with her shaking hands. Ryker stood, circling the table, his eyes on the envelope. He didn't need to look inside to know the millions in cash weren't just for gas or a one-way plane ticket. It was a burden, an invisible stone tying them to a relentless escape. "You sure you want to keep this?" Ryker asked, his voice calm but icy. The fire swayed, casting light across his face. Finn nodded, her resolute eyes suddenly blazing with determination. "I can't keep running forever. I have to use it, expose all the evidence." Her simple words carried a heavy duty, making the cabin's air feel like a battlefield after a bloodbath. Ryker took it all in, the envelope, the classified documents, the business papers. He packed them into an old backpack, handling them as delicately as eggs in a nest to avoid tearing the edges. When the backpack's zipper clicked shut with a damp thud, they knew this wasn't just a flight, it was the start of a perilous mission. She leaned back in the chair, her voice hoarse. "I've gone through it all, but I can't make sense of everything. There are contracts, notes, offshore accounts. I just know the longer we wait, the easier it is for my father to find us." Ryker nodded, crouching to feed the fire. "I'll find someone who knows the law, maybe a coder to crack any encryption, but first we need to erase our tracks. The fire flared red, pushing the darkness to the cabin's corners. Finn stood, moving to the small window, lifting the tattered curtain. She gazed at a sky speckled with a few stars amid thick black clouds. "I want to stay here one night, before we move on." Her voice was light, like a plea for a moment of peace before the storm. Ryker stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder, warmth seeping through her thick jacket. "One night, not a second more." His voice was soft but cautious. She placed her hand over his, responding with a slight nod. In that fleeting touch, they found solace. She found refuge. He found a reason to rise from a fractured life. They sat by the stove, sharing a meager bag of stale bread and a few crumpled candies from the backpack. The wind howled outside, the fire crackled, and a quiet calm mixed with tomorrow's dread. Finn frowned, suddenly asking, "What about your family? Don't you have anyone waiting?" Ryker sighed, glancing at an old photo in his wallet, a distant father who left when he was young. "I'm like you. I left my past behind long ago." The cabin seemed to expand, cradling their unexpected confessions. They both stared into the fire, imagining a future of tempests, but also glimmers of hope. Ryker patted her hand lightly. "We'll find a safer place, and from there, we'll act." Finn whispered a response, like a prayer. "Thank you, Ryker." That night's wind, the crackling wood, and the breaths of two exiles wove a fragile symphony. In the moss-covered cabin deep in the forest, they were no longer masters or slaves of their pasts. They were reluctant allies, kindling a flame of freedom and justice in boundless darkness. As the fire dwindled, their souls closed their eyes, letting the night's fleeting magic lull them into a brief sleep before the stormy road ahead. The engine's roar thundered through the night like a war drum as two black SUVs loomed at the edge of the desolate rest stop. Their blinding headlights pierced the flickering neon sign, casting eerie glints across Ryker Flint and Serafina Finn Vale as they stepped out of the gas station cabin. The wind carried scattered rain, swirling droplets that shimmered in the air, enveloping the two figures frozen in the wild expanse. Ryker squared his shoulders, his voice hoarse. "They're here." Finn pressed her back against the weathered wooden wall, her eyes locked on the figures emerging from the vehicle. 5 dark silhouettes materialized under the headlights, their sturdy frames and rigid stances like stone sentinels guarding a border. Gun holsters gleamed coldly at their waists and lapels. These were the enforcers sent by Alistair Vale, Finn's powerful father, hunting her down. Without hesitation, Ryker grabbed her hand, his voice low. "Stay quiet and follow me. Don't let them spot you." Finn's eyes flashed with resolve, and she ducked her head, leaning into Ryker's shoulder for cover. The cabin door shut softly, the bolt clicking like a countdown, signaling the need to act now. They scrambled into the mud-caked old pickup, Ryker flooring the gas. The tires sprayed mud in a chaotic arc, a fleeting spectacle in the rainy night. The enforcers flinched, some drawing their guns, diving for cover behind the SUVs. The engine's growl clashed with the rain pounding the rugged road, a symphony of chaos. The lead SUV gave chase, its tires screaming as it followed the pickup's taillights. Street lights reflected off the thin film of water on the windshield, creating fractured glimmers like shattered glass. Ryker flicked the wipers, sweeping away the rain to clear his view of the road ahead. "Left," he barked, yanking the wheel sharply. The truck swerved, skidding onto a dirt shoulder. Mud exploded like fireworks, obscuring the SUV's view. The enforcers leapt from their vehicle, guns drawn, advancing toward the convenience store. In that split second, Ryker flung open the door, pulling Finn out. Their feet splashed through deep puddles as they vanished into the forest's shadows. A narrow path wound through dense underbrush, just wide enough for them to move side by side, shielding the waiting pickup for their final plan. Ryker halted, inhaling the damp air, then pulled Finn close behind a rotting oak. The forest was so silent they could hear their hearts pounding. A headlight beam sliced through the canopy, flickering their shadows like ghosts in the misty woods. Shouts and hurried footsteps echoed from beyond the trees. "There! Over that way! Move!" A man's deep, urgent voice commanded. Ryker tightened his grip, pressing Finn against him, whispering, "When I move, you run to the other side of the trail. Got it?" She nodded fiercely, her eyes a mix of fear and trust. He edged forward, inching toward the forest path, his movements deliberate, like a fateful throw. His heart sank, each moment teetering on the edge. Just then, the second SUV crept closer, its beam flooding the narrow space. Ryker knew it was time to free Finn from the trap. "Now!" he hissed, springing up and shoving Finn forward. She lunged, feet slipping in the mud but pushing hard. Ryker spun back, diving toward a thicket, yanking the backpack with the evidence and tossing it into a ditch. He roared, toppling a tree to block the path, shouting to misdirect, "Over here! She's headed that way!" Before he could catch his breath, he bolted after Finn's fading figure in the rain. Behind him, 2 warning shots cracked through the air. Bullets whistled, one splintering a tree near Ryker with a guttural thud. The acrid smell of gunfire mingled with the damp forest, underscoring the brutal stakes of the moment. When Finn was out of sight, Ryker doubled back, retrieving the backpack, and sprinted the opposite way. Grass and roots crunched under his feet. The shortest path to the main road laid bare. He raced to the old pickup, climbed into the cab, and popped the hood, tweaking the rusted battery. His hands, slick with oil and rain, blended into a dark, gritty weapon. The engine roared to life. He slammed the gear shift, tearing through the forest road, outpacing headlights and storm, heading for Finn. Amid the wind and rain, his phone buzzed. He yanked it from his pocket, the faint green glow revealing a text. "You okay?" From a trusted contact who'd agreed to take the document. Ryker exhaled, his trembling hands typing a reply, but another gunshot rang out, closer now. "No time," he said. "She's fine, stand by." Then tossed the phone into a metal slot, eyes scanning for Finn's hidden figure. The SUV's headlights roared closer, their engines snarling like predators in the rain. Ryker floored it, the old pickup surging, clipping a massive tree, bending its frame. He gripped the wheel, plunging into the night. The SUVs barreled past, swerving through the forest edge but losing the pickup's trail. Ryker exploited a narrow forest track, gunning the engine again, the truck spewing mud, his silhouette swaying among the trees. The black night swallowed the engine's growl and his racing heartbeat. Finally, when silence reclaimed the vast darkness, Ryker slammed the brakes by a small stream. He flicked on the fog lights, panting, hands drenched in oil and rain. Through a gap in the leaves he spotted Serafina Finn Vale staggering, her face pale in the faint moonlight. She wiped tears, offering a weary smile, and reached through the misty window. Ryker flung open the door, rushing to pull her into his arms. In the freezing fog, amid mud and pelting rain, they held each other in a fleeting grasp of fragile freedom. Under a sky speckled with stars peeking through the canopy, they knew this moment was proof of their reckless choice to stand together, no matter how fierce the storm, never alone. The brutal rain from the previous night lingered in faint droplets, cloaking the abandoned industrial complex in a chilling mist. Crumbling concrete buildings rusted away, warped steel shutters hung crooked, and brittle vines clung to broken iron beams, forming a silent, eerie labyrinth. Amid this, in the dim haze occasionally pierced by rare lightning, Serafina Finn Vale sat bound to a rickety wooden chair in the main warehouse. She lifted her head, eyes shadowed from the long, tense night, scanning the face of her captor, a towering man with a scruffy beard and merciless eyes. In the distance, a faint engine growled, a sound blending hope and danger. Ryker Flint emerged from a corner, his face streaked with mud and sweat. He gripped a crossbody bag tightly against his chest, safeguarding Vale Corp's incriminating evidence. His steps were soft but resolute, the clank of his steel-toed boots echoing on the cracked concrete like a challenge. In the flickering light, his shadow stretched long, falling across Finn's anxious face. The guard spun, instantly drawing his gun and aiming at Ryker. The cold metal gleamed, speckled with rain. "Freeze!" he barked, his voice sharp as a gale. But Ryker didn't falter. He stopped a few paces away, raising a bundle of cloth to show he posed no threat. "I'm just here to pick up my girl," he said, voice gravelly. "She's ready to go." The guard raised an eyebrow, but before he could react, Ryker lunged with fluid precision, his boot sweeping hard into the man's knee. The crack of bone echoed under thick leather. The guard howled, his gun clattering to the floor, and before he could recover, Ryker landed a second blow, a hooking punch to the jaw, sending him sprawling. As the guard collapsed, Ryker darted to Finn, yanking at her ropes. She winced, her wrists straining against the tight cords. He exhaled sharply, gritting his teeth, tearing off his tattered glove. In the dim light, a cut on his hand oozed blood, soaking the fabric. The pain only fueled his resolve. One more second and she'd be free. As she twisted, enduring the pain, a gunshot rang out from the adjacent warehouse. A muzzle flash sparked, casting silver light on Ryker's bloodied hand. More enforcers were closing in, their bullets sprang through the rainy air. Ryker pivoted, pressing Finn against a grimy wall. Amid the stench of oil and mildew, they froze in a moment of intense calculation. Ryker leaned close, whispering, "Hold on to me. On 3, we run." Finn nodded, her fingers trembling from cold and pain. 1. He crouched, muscles taut, ready. 2. A volley of bullets whizzed by, striking scrap metal and sparking. 3. He surged toward the main door, hoisting her up, sprinting like a shadow collapsing into night. The air stung their faces, whipping Finn's hair wildly. Gunfire thundered behind, mixed with the enforcers' shouts as they gave chase. Ryker shielded her, weaving through debris, dodging rusted pipes and shattered barrels like a seasoned operative, navigating obstacles. She clung to his jacket, lips pressed to stifle a cry, her heart pounding like a war drum. They reached an auxiliary building with a flimsy lock. Ryker kicked the rusted bolt free. Inside, a narrow hallway stretched, its gray concrete walls pocked with bullet holes. The enforcer's footsteps grew louder, closing in. He pressed Finn into a corner, lifting his jacket to reveal a small pistol borrowed from the gas station's safe. In the flickering light, its barrel glinted silver. The enforcers stormed in, advancing in waves. Ryker raised the gun, firing blindly at the nearest figure. The shot echoed, the bullets' whine reverberating through the corridor. One man fell, his weapon clattering. Ryker ducked low, firing at a second shadow. The acrid smell of gunpowder mingled with the rain outside. Finn pressed against the wall, eyes fixed on the distant door at the hallway's end. She saw a faint glow, the waiting truck under a trembling awning. Ryker wiped sweat from his brow, gritting his teeth. "Watch your step." She gave a quiet smile, nodding. "I'm ready." He led her toward the side exit just as the old pickup rumbled closer. Its tires churned mud, the engine's roar pounding the concrete like a battle cry. Ryker steadied her, ducking under the chassis, and hauled her into the enclosed cargo bed. The rear door slammed shut, locking with a dry metallic clank. Before they could catch their breath, he hit the ignition. The truck roared, lurching onto the muddy forest road. The enforcer's headlights faded behind. The rain had stopped, leaving only heavy droplets on the leaves. In the cramped cargo bed, Ryker and Finn faced each other, eyes still tracking the sealed metal door. The truck's lights grazed roadside trees, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Serafina Finn Vale leaned against the side, panting, her pale face glowing with survival's spark. She whispered, "We did it. I can't believe." Ryker flashed a rare smile, voice rough. We're still alive, and we've got the evidence." He extended his bloodied hand and she placed hers in it. The storm had passed, but what lay ahead was fiercer than any tempest. The battle for justice against Vale Corp was just beginning. In the pale moonlight and the engine's steady hum, two resilient souls knew that as long as they had each other, they'd never face the long road ahead alone. The morning mist clung to the rotting wooden cabin, blurring everything into a dreamlike haze. Outside, wild birds chirped faintly amid the dense pine forest, while inside, the fire in the rusted iron stove had dwindled to smoldering ash, its faint heat battling the chilly air. Ryker Flint crouched by the ancient wooden table, his eyes scanning the dusty documents, contracts, banknotes, and ledgers, all stamped with Vale Corp's logo. Each page was a shattered mirror, reflecting crimes, every word a fragment of the truth Serafina Finn Vale had stolen from her father. Alistair Vale's lavish yet sordid world. Finn curled up on the creaky chair, her shoulders trembling like a forgotten toy in a dusty corner. She clasped her hands, staring at the ash-streaked concrete floor, summoning courage with each breath. The memory of being bound that morning still haunted her, but here in the mysterious cabin, she found something new: the power of truth. Ryker stood, wiping sweat from his brow, and gently flipped through the pages. "These the offshore accounts you mentioned," he murmured, his voice low, like an echo from the earth. The firelight danced across the documents, turning them into a vivid jungle of colors, but beneath the hues lay darkness: money laundering, corruption, bribes to officials. Each contract bearing Alistair Vale's signature was a dagger twisting in Finn's conscience. Finn stepped closer, resting her hand on a crumpled page. "I didn't realize the crimes could be this horrific," she said, her voice choked. "My father, he turned other people's dreams into bargaining chips for power." Tears fell silently, tracing her cheeks, mingling with the dim firelight. Ryker looked at her, his gaze not of anger but of a fellow traveler. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're not just running. We're going to make this truth explode." His voice was firm, like a hammer striking solid stone, determined to shatter the wall of lies. They fell silent, listening to the dry wood crackle in the stove. The cabin felt smaller yet strangely warm, a refuge where two exiles found each other amid the wreckage of their pasts. Ryker pulled an old flashlight from his backpack, flicking it on, its beam illuminating a corner of the cabin. He spread the documents on the table and traced a line on a small map. "Here, the local newspaper office in Clearwater Bay. If we can get the evidence to the right reporter, justice will speak." Finn nodded. "I know someone. She works in investigations. I have her email and phone number. I'll send the portion online first to stir the public." Her voice was light as a falling leaf, yet it carried the unyielding strength of resolve. The wind howled outside, slipping tiny mist droplets into the cabin as dawn's light broke through the night's rain. Ryker opened the door, breathing in the damp, green scent of the forest. He draped a cloak over her shoulders, his voice warm. "We need to move early, before anyone finds this cabin." Outside, dew sparkled on pine needles like crystal beads. They quickly packed: an old laptop, a USB with scanned documents, and a few dry clothes. Finn rolled up the thin blanket, stuffing it into the backpack, while Ryker checked his pistol and spare rounds. Before climbing into the old pickup, Finn touched the cabin's wall, whispering, "Thank you for saving me from my family's shadow." Her eyes brimmed with gratitude and an unspoken vow she'd never forget the garden of sins she'd buried. They got in, Ryker starting the engine and easing onto the leaf-strewn forest road. Under the tires, dry leaves rustled like an ancient forest's farewell. The morning breeze carried warmth from the cab, clearing the mist from the windshield. Heading toward Clearwater Bay, Finn sat pressed against the seat, eyes on the map. "I'll send the first email when we reach town. We've got one shot. If we miss it, my father will target us next." Her voice trembled but held fierce determination. Ryker didn't reply, just nodded. He glanced out the side window, the tranquil forest eerily calm, like the quiet before a storm. He thought of the previous night, the breathless rescue, and vowed silently no one would steal this girl's freedom. As the faint blue of the sea appeared on the horizon, a promise of a new haven, Ryker Flint and Serafina Finn Vale prepared for the next chapter of their fight for justice. A long, treacherous road, but one brimming with hope, like a clear sky after rain. The delicate morning mist draped over Clearwater Bay like a silvery silk veil, heralding a day brimming with hope. Ryker Flint and Serafina Finn Vale leaned against the side of their weathered pickup, listening to the soft murmur of waves filtering through the pipes of their newly renovated workshop, Flint and Veil Garage. Rebuilt from a pile of scrap metal, the road behind them bore the muddy scars of forest trails, but ahead lay a quaint coastal street bathed in dawn's pink glow. Ryker's arm rested around Finn's shoulders as they gazed at the sun-bleached tin roof, where a hand-carved wooden sign reading Flint and Veil Garage swayed gently in the breeze. The morning unfolded like a symphony, the faint hum of engines, the clink of hammers on metal, and the distant cries of seagulls over shimmering water. Ryker moved among salt-crusted old cars, inspecting parts, muttering numbers and mechanical terms only he fully understood. Meanwhile, Finn knelt beside a truck, gloved hands steady, the traces of their perilous night fading, replaced by newfound confidence. She smoothed a repaired door, checked bolts, and wiped oil from her hands. Her smile, flickering through the misty air, radiated warmth across the garage. The atmosphere here was a far cry from the rain-soaked forests or the gunfire echoing through abandoned warehouses. Their lives had once been fractures amid storms and shadows, but now they breathed the salty sea air, feeling life's slow rhythm ebb with the tides. Ryker sighed, his eyes catching the glint of sunlight on a car's hood, then turned to Finn as she looked up, asking, "Think we'll get our first customer today?" Her voice was warm, like a melody from the Milky Way, blending with the hum of engines. He grinned, nodding. "Folks need a place to fix up cars after storms, I'm sure of it." In truth, Ryker and Finn knew they weren't just servicing old vehicles. They were mending weary souls seeking shelter from life's tempests. A few locals had already stopped by, an old fisherman, a widowed seamstress, each bringing stories of joy and sorrow, fueling their drive to make Flint and Veil Garage more than a repair shop, a place that connected hearts. By midday, sunlight streamed through the workshop's windows, casting dancing patterns on the concrete floor. Ryker paused, pulling a small wooden box from his pocket. He ran his fingers over its polished surface, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. Finn stopped wiping down a car, leaning closer, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. He opened the lid, revealing a simple yet elegant silver ring, its gleam a promise of the future. The air stilled, filled only with the sea breeze singing its morning hymn. Ryker knelt, placing the ring in Finn's palm, his voice soft as a passing gust. "I've got nothing valuable but this land and this life. I can't promise a grand future, only that I'll stand by you, no matter the storm." Finn's heart raced, silent tears of joy mingling with the salty sea air in her eyes. She nodded, her lips trembling with a smile. "I do." A warm embrace, a pat on the shoulder, and they dove back into work, each motion now infused with joy. Customers brought battered cars, which they transformed into sleek mechanical art, under the hands of two former wanderers who'd braved the storm. Finn brewed drip coffee, its rich aroma warming the space, while Ryker reassembled engines, each bolt tightened with love and gratitude. At noon, they shared a simple meal of cold rice and roadside water spinach, talking about days past. Finn spoke of her plan to send the full dossier to a reporter, sparking a relentless investigation. Ryker savored each grain, his eyes brightening at the thought of justice prevailing. They knew media attention alone wasn't enough. They needed more evidence. But here, in this tight-knit community, they'd found allies. Locals with printers, press, contacts, ready to help spread the truth. As dusk painted the horizon pink, Ryker, Flint, and Serafina Finn Vale leaned against the garage railing, watching cars line the coastal road. The rhythmic crash of waves blended with echoes of trust. Freedom and justice were never a solitary path. In the fiery twilight, the garage glowed as a symbol of love and hope, a place where two lost souls had gathered fragments of their past, forging a new, whole life. Under a sky soon to glitter with stars, they shared a gentle kiss, vowing, no matter how fierce the challenges, Ryker Flint and Serafina Finn Vale would walk the rest of the road together, having found in each other a lighthouse guiding them to a shore of happiness. Dawn painted Clearwater Bay's sea golden, gentle waves lapping at the weathered wooden pier. The morning mist quietly dissolved, revealing Flint and Veil Garage, a humble repair shop brimming with faith amid the vast sandy shore. Ryker Flint stood in the yard, arm around Serafina Finn Vale's shoulders, both gazing at the ocean reflecting the pale sunrise. Days of fleeing and fierce struggles, like raging storms, had faded, leaving behind a road lined with memories and tire tracks caked in sand. They stepped into the garage, where rows of old cars, peeling paint, dented frames, were slowly reviving under careful hands. Ryker shoved open the creaking iron door, neon lights flickering to life, flooding the workspace. The grind of metal polishers, the clang of hammers, and the soft growl of engines wove a familiar rhythm, the pulse of hope. Finn set a drip coffee mug on the table, inhaling the blend of misty air and rich coffee aroma. She brushed the documents on the desk, once a source of fear, now tools for unveiling true power. Together they opened a small chest, a keepsake from the night of their escape, containing a USB with Vale Corp's evidence and two simple silver rings. Ryker slipped one onto Finn's pinky, his eyes warm. This isn't just a beginning, but a promise to build a different future together. She gripped his hand, her smile radiant as the day's first sunlight spilling over the sea. Footsteps echoed at the garage door. A team of investigative reporters, whom Finn had contacted earlier, entered, armed with cameras and recorders. They carried the public's hope, their mission to expose the truth, already rippling far and wide. Finn handed over the local newspaper, its bold headline screaming, "Damning evidence rocks Vale Corp empire," followed by detailed analysis. Her face shifted from nervous to confident, like a warrior donning the armor of knowledge. In the small workshop hall, Ryker stood by Finn, her pillar of strength. They watched as reporters clicked cameras, conducting a brief interview. "Serafina Vale, what message do you have for the community?" She answered, her voice clear and resolute. "I've witnessed deceit and abuse of power. I sought freedom and justice not to escape but to build a world where no one is trapped in a gilded cage." The crowd's gazes locked onto her, like headlights piercing the dark. After the interview, Ryker whispered in her ear, "You did it." She turned to him, eyes red with emotion, touching his cheek. "I couldn't have done this without you." By afternoon, the garage buzzed with visitors. A farmer with a rumbling produce truck, an elderly woman with a basket of wildflowers needing her gas tank polished, their calloused hands offering warm smiles. Flint and Veil Garage was no longer just a repair shop. It had become a symbol of a united community, a haven where drifting lives found warmth and trust. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ryker and Finn leaned against the garage railing, watching soft pink clouds dissolve over the sea. The sea breeze brushed their shoulders, carrying salt and the silken rhythm of gentle waves. Finn placed her hand on his chest, whispering, "If I could choose again, I'd still run to you." He smiled, nodding, "And I'd stop the truck for you anytime." The garage bell rang one last time, joined by cheers from customers and friends. In the fading light, Ryker Flint and Serafina Finn Vale stood like a twilight painting, half shadow, half radiance. They'd weathered storms, traded life or death battles for this moment of peace. Like the sea forever caressing the shore, they'd keep steering Flint and Veil Garage, not just a place for fixing machines, but a workshop for honing faith and love for anyone seeking a fresh start. As night fell, they looked at each other, hands clasped, vowing, no matter the challenges ahead, no matter how fierce the storms, Ryker Flint and Serafina Finn Vale would remain each other's lighthouse, guiding through the darkness toward a horizon of freedom and justice. Thank you for joining the thrilling journey of Ryker Flint and Serafina Finn. Vale was religiously tutored by her father to prepare her for the storm of power to seek freedom and justice. We hope this story touched your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Millionaire and Heart Stories.